The crystal ballroom of the Grand Majestic Hotel was suffocating in diamonds and champagne. It was the annual Innovators Gala, the pinnacle of the city's tech elite, and at its center stood Ethan and Clara Hayes, the golden couple. He was the self-made billionaire, CEO of Aura Innovations. She was his beautiful, angelic wife, 6 months pregnant with their first child. To the hundreds of guests, they were the picture of absolute perfection. But perfection is often the most fragile illusion. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a video is worth the truth. In 60 seconds, one man's uncontrollable rage and 100 smartphone cameras would not just shatter an illusion, but burn an entire memoir to the ground. This is the story of what happened when the monster behind the perfect husband was exposed to the world. The air in the crystal ballroom was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, French champagne, and the quiet, self-satisfied hum of the city's most powerful people. Clara Hayes felt a familiar wave of anxiety tighten its grip around her chest, a feeling she had grown adept at concealing behind a serene, practiced smile. She rested a hand on the gentle swell of her stomach, the life growing within her, a secret anchor in this turbulent sea of ambition and pretense. Her husband, Ethan Hayes, was in his element. He moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, his hand possessively on the small of her back. His smile was dazzling, his charisma a palpable force that drew people into his orbit. He was the founder and CEO of Aura Innovations, a tech behemoth that had revolutionized personal data security. To the world, he was a visionary, a genius. To Clara, he was the architect of her beautiful, suffocating cage. "Darling, you look breathtaking," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear, his voice low and intimate for the benefit of a passing journalist from Forbes. But Clara felt the chill in his touch. It wasn't affection. It was a reminder that she was an accessory, the most valuable piece in his collection, meant to be admired, but never to speak out of turn. Her gown of flowing emerald silk that cost more than her first car had been his choice. Her jewelry, a cascade of diamonds that felt heavy around her neck, had been his selection. Her smile was his command. "Thank you, Ethan," she replied, her voice a soft melody that belied the tremor within. "You're very handsome tonight." He squeezed her waist a little too tightly. "Just remember to stick to the script, Clara. We talk about the new charitable foundation, The Baby, and how supportive you are of the company's expansion. No surprises." "Of course," she said, nodding. No surprises. That was the cardinal rule of their marriage. For 2 hours, she played her part flawlessly. She laughed at the right jokes, offered charming anecdotes about their nursery preparations, and gazed at her husband with what she hoped passed for adoration. But her eyes kept scanning the room, a nervous tic she couldn't control. She was looking for Sophia Russo. Sophia was Aura's head of global strategy. She was sharp, ambitious, and devastatingly beautiful, with raven hair and a predatory intelligence in her eyes that mirrored Ethan's. For the past 6 months, Clara had seen the signs. The late-night board meetings, the lingering scent of a different perfume on his suits, the secretive texts that would make him smile in a way he never smiled at her anymore. Clara had even tried to bring it up once gently. The resulting rage had been terrifying. A thrown crystal glass, a venomous tirade about her paranoid hormonal delusions, and a week of icy silence had taught her never to question him again. She spotted them near the towering ice sculpture of Aura's logo. Ethan had his back to her, but the angle was unmistakable. He was leaning in close to Sophia, his head bent as he spoke. Sophia laughed, a throaty, confident sound that echoed across the marble floor, and placed a perfectly manicured hand on his forearm. It lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. It was a gesture of such casual intimacy that it felt like a physical blow to Clara. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He had promised. After her last episode, he had sworn on the life of their unborn child that there was nothing going on, that she was his entire world. He had made her feel crazy irrational. Yet here was the proof, bold and glittering under the chandeliers. A wave of nausea entirely unrelated to her pregnancy washed over her. She needed air. Excusing herself from a conversation with a city councilman, she whispered to Ethan, "I'm just going to step out onto the terrace for a moment." He didn't even look at her. "Fine. Don't be long. We're about to make the announcement." His focus was already back on Sophia. The cold night air was a relief, but it couldn't cool the fire of betrayal burning in her gut. She leaned against the stone balustrade overlooking the city's glittering skyline. For years she had told herself this was enough. The security, the lifestyle, the public image of a perfect marriage. She had traded her own ambitions, her friends, her very self for this. And for what? To be a broodmare and a prop publicly humiliated while her husband conducted an affair with his colleague. The baby kicked a soft, insistent flutter. It was a reminder of why she had stayed, why she had endured. She wanted this child to have a perfect life, a complete family. But what kind of life would it be built on a foundation of lies and fear? Taking a deep, shaky breath, she decided she couldn't let it go. Not tonight. Not when the lie was being so brazenly flaunted in front of everyone. The old Clara, the one before Ethan had systematically dismantled her confidence, would have confronted him. Tonight, Clara had to return. She pushed herself off the balustrade, a new steely resolve hardening her features, and walked back into the ballroom. She was done being a silent accessory. She was going to get the truth. She had no idea that in doing so, she was about to light a fuse that would incinerate her entire world. Clara re-entered the ballroom with a purpose that felt foreign and exhilarating. Her usual deference was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. She scanned the room, her eyes finding Ethan almost immediately. He was no longer with Sophia, but was now standing on the low-lit stage at the far end of the room. A microphone in his hand, preparing for the gala's main event, his keynote address, and a major company announcement. Her heart sank. The timing was terrible. A public confrontation now would be a catastrophe. Perhaps she should wait. But as she watched him bask in the adulation of the crowd, a switch flipped inside her. He was about to stand before hundreds of people and speak of integrity, vision, and family, the very things he was desecrating in his private life. She couldn't let him. She started moving toward the stage, a lone figure in emerald silk against the tide of rapt faces. People turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. She ignored them. Her focus was solely on the man bathed in the spotlight. Ethan saw her approaching. A flicker of annoyance crossed his perfect features, quickly masked by his public smile. He subtly angled his body away, a clear signal for her to return to her seat. She kept walking. She reached the side of the stage, just as he was starting his speech. "And so as we look to the future of Aura Innovations," he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom sound system, "we are guided by one core principle: transparency." The hypocrisy was so staggering that a bitter laugh almost escaped Clara's lips. She took the 3 short steps up onto the stage, A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Ethan's smile froze. "Clara, what are you doing?" he hissed into the microphone, which was still live, his voice a dangerous whisper that carried to the first few rows. "I need to talk to you, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Now, get off the stage," he commanded, his eyes turning to black ice. He tried to grab her arm, but she sidestepped him. The audience was now a sea of bewildered faces. The low hum of conversation had ceased, replaced by an unnerving silence. Then a few pinpricks of light appeared in the darkness. Smartphones. People were starting to record. One of those phones belonged to David Smith, a tenacious tech blogger known for his scathing takedowns of corporate hypocrisy. He'd had a feeling about Ethan Hayes for years, a sense that the man's flawless public persona was a sham. He zoomed in his finger steady on the record button. "We can talk about this later, Clara," Ethan said, his voice dropping lower, each word laced with menace. He turned his back to the audience, shielding their exchange from most eyes, but not from the lenses. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing me." "Am I?" Clara shot back, her newfound courage surging. "Or are you embarrassing yourself with Sophia Russo?" Ethan's face went white with fury. The mask of the charming CEO dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. "You foolish girl!" He spat the words inaudible to the crowd, but crystal clear on David Smith's recording. "I warned you about this. I warned you about your paranoid fantasies." "It's not a fantasy," she cried, her voice cracking. "I saw you with her. Everyone sees it." "How dare you stand up here and talk about transparency when you are lying to my face, to everyone?" It happened in a horrifying instant. Ethan's control snapped. His hand shot out, not to restrain her, but to silence her. He didn't punch her. It was something more intimate, more degrading. He slapped her. The sound was sharp and ugly, a crack that echoed in the cavernous, silent room. The force of it sent Clara stumbling backward. Her heel caught on a cable, and she lost her balance. Time seemed to slow down as she fell, her hands flying instinctively to her pregnant belly. She landed hard on her side, the air knocked from her lungs in a pained gasp. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute stunned silence. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the world had stopped turning. The image was surreal, the beloved philanthropist on the floor, the visionary billionaire standing over her with a look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face. Then the dam broke. A woman in the front row screamed. A dozen more phones were raised, their screens glowing like accusatory eyes in the dim light. David Smith kept recording, his heart pounding. He knew he was capturing more than a domestic dispute. He was capturing the implosion of an empire. Ethan seemed to snap out of his stupor, the horror of his actions dawning on him, not with remorse, but with the cold dread of public exposure. He looked out at the sea of phones, at the shocked and horrified faces, and his carefully constructed world crumbled into dust around him. He had just committed career suicide on a live-streamed stage, and his pregnant wife was lying on the floor, the living proof of his monstrosity. The unmasking was complete. The 5 seconds of stunned silence felt like an eternity. Then chaos erupted. But it wasn't the chaos of a mob. It was the chillingly modern chaos of the digital age. Before security could even reach the stage, before anyone could help Clara to her feet, the first video was already being uploaded. David Smith didn't hesitate. He added a simple, brutal caption. CEO Ethan Hayes of Aura Innovations physically assaults his pregnant wife, Clara Hayes, on stage at the Innovators Gala. He tagged every major news outlet he could think of and added the hashtag #EthanHayes Exposed. Then he hit post. The video shot across the internet like wildfire. It was raw, shaky, and undeniable. It captured everything: Clara's desperate plea, Ethan's whispered threats, the sickening crack of the slap, and the horrifying thud of her fall. Within 10 minutes, hashtag Ethan Hayes Exposed was the #1 trending topic worldwide. On the stage, the immediate aftermath was a blur of frantic movement. A stout, silver-haired woman in a Chanel suit was the first to reach Clara. It was Eleanor Vance, a formidable presence on Aura's board of directors, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. She knelt beside Clara, ignoring Ethan completely. "Are you all right, dear? The baby?" Eleanor's voice was firm but gentle. Clara, dazed and trembling, could only nod, tears streaming down her face. "I think so. I think we're okay." Ethan, meanwhile, had been swarmed by his own security team. "Get her out of here!" He was snarling, gesturing wildly at Clara. "And confiscate those phones. All of them." But it was like trying to cup water in a sieve. The evidence was already out. His PR team, led by a panicked-looking man named Marcus, was trying to run damage control, but it was impossible. The story was moving faster than they could type a press release. News vans were screeching to a halt outside the Grand Majestic before most of the guests had even processed what they had seen. The Gala, a celebration of innovation, had become the scene of a brutal crime, and the world was watching in real time. By the time Eleanor Vance had helped Clara to a private room, shielding her from the flashing cameras of the guests, the digital storm was a full-blown hurricane. The stock for Aura Innovations, set to open on the Asian market in a few hours, was already in free fall in after-hours trading. Investors were panicking. The company, built on the promise of security and trust, was now inextricably linked to an act of violent public betrayal. Comments poured in by the thousands per second. "I just cancelled my Aura subscription. I will not support a wife-beater. My God, she's pregnant. What kind of monster does that? He didn't even try to help her. He just looked at the cameras. A true narcissist." Sophia Russo had vanished from the ballroom the moment the slap landed. She was already on the phone with her lawyer, her mind racing. She was tied to Ethan, but she had to distance herself, and fast. Her ambition was fierce, but it didn't include going down with a sinking ship. Holed up in a suite upstairs, Clara was being checked by the hotel's on-call doctor. The baby's heartbeat was strong, a steady, reassuring rhythm in a world that had just been torn apart. Eleanor Vance sat with her, her expression grim. She had pulled up her own phone and was scrolling through the news feeds. "He's finished," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The board will convene an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. He'll be forced to resign by noon." Clara looked at the older woman, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, nascent sense of relief. "Is it everywhere?" Eleanor turned her phone so Clara could see. It was a dizzying mosaic of her own horrified face. News headlines screamed from the screen, "Tech Titans Tyranny." The slap heard around the world. Aura of abuse. Ethan Hayes video goes viral. She saw screenshots of Ethan's face twisted in rage. She saw her own crumpled form on the stage. It was the most humiliating moment of her life broadcast for millions to see. But as she looked at the outpouring of support for her and the vitriol directed at Ethan, she didn't feel shame. She felt validated. The invisible bruises he had inflicted on her soul for years were suddenly visible to everyone. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't paranoid. She was a victim, and now finally people knew it. Ethan, meanwhile, was in his own suite, not with Clara, but with his legal and PR teams. He was pacing like a caged animal, his face a mask of incandescent fury. He wasn't apologetic. He wasn't remorseful. He was furious that he'd been caught. "We need a statement," Marcus, his head of PR, said, his hands shaking. "Something about stress, a private matter, a momentary lapse." "A lapse?" Ethan roared, sweeping a vase of orchids off a table. It shattered against the wall. "She provoked me. She came up on that stage to ruin me, and she did. This is her fault." His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the attitude of a man seeking redemption. This was the fury of a tyrant whose power had been challenged. "We'll draft something," one of the lawyers said placatingly. "We'll say Mrs. Hayes was emotionally distressed due to her pregnancy and Mr. Hayes reacted poorly under immense pressure. We'll ask for privacy as they work through this difficult family matter." It was a weak, pathetic strategy, and they all knew it. The video was too clear, the act too brutal. There was no spinning this. The digital storm was raging, and it was washing away Ethan Hayes' name, his company, and his entire life, one damning share and retweet at a time. While Ethan Hayes barricaded himself in his multi-million-dollar penthouse, turning it into a fortress against the besieging army of media, Clara Hayes became a fugitive. But she wasn't running from the law. She was running from the life she knew. Eleanor Vance had arranged for a private car to take her from the hotel through a service exit, shielding her from the paparazzi swarming the main entrance. The obvious choice would have been to go to her parents in Connecticut, but Clara knew that would be the first place Ethan would look. He wouldn't come with apologies, but with threats and manipulations determined to coerce her into a joint statement that would salvage his reputation. She couldn't face that. Not yet. There was only one other place she could go, one person she could trust implicitly. A name from a life before Ethan, a life where she had been her own person. "Take me to Brooklyn," she told the driver, giving him an address he would never find in a society magazine. She arrived at a modest pre-war brownstone just before dawn. She paid the driver in cash and watched him pull away before she climbed the steps and rang the bell. The door opened a crack, and a tired face with sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. "Clara." Jessica Riley's voice was thick with sleep, but her eyes snapped wide with recognition and shock. "Oh my God! Get in here!" Jessica was a prosecutor for the DA's office, a woman who dealt with the city's worst criminals on a daily basis. She and Clara had been inseparable in college, but their lives had diverged dramatically. As Clara had been drawn deeper into Ethan's world of galas and empty pleasantries, her friendship with the blunt, fiercely independent Jessica had faded a casualty of Ethan's isolating control. Jessica pulled her into a hug, and for the first time that night, Clara allowed herself to break. The sobs came in ragged, painful waves for her shattered marriage, for her unborn child, for the years she had lost. Jessica just held her murmuring, soothing words until the storm passed. "I've seen the video, Clara," Jessica said softly, leading her to a worn but comfortable sofa. "The whole world has." Meanwhile, across the river in his glass-walled fortress, Ethan was waging a war. He was on the phone, screaming at his board members, his investors, his lawyers. But for the first time in his life, his voice held no power. The video had stripped him of his authority. He was no longer a visionary. He was a liability, a pariah. As predicted, the emergency board meeting was swift and brutal. By 9 a.m., Aura Innovations had released a statement. The board of directors has voted unanimously to place CEO Ethan Hayes on an indefinite leave of absence. An interim CEO has been appointed. Aura Innovations has a zero-tolerance policy for violence and abuse of any kind. It was a corporate execution. Ethan saw the news alert on his phone and hurled it across the room, where it shattered against a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. He was out. Kicked out of the company he had built from nothing. His rage, denied a physical outlet, festered into a cunning, desperate plan. He had his PR team release the statement he had conceived hours earlier. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "I am deeply ashamed of my actions last night," the statement read. "The pressures of my work, combined with my wife Clara's fragile emotional state during her pregnancy, led to a regrettable and momentary loss of control. This is a private family matter, and we ask for space as we seek counseling and healing together. I love my wife, and I am dedicated to making amends." It was a disgusting, calculated lie designed to paint Clara as an unstable hormonal woman and himself as a stressed but ultimately loving husband. It was an attempt to muddy the waters, to turn the narrative from abuser and victim to troubled couple. In Brooklyn, Jessica read the statement aloud from her laptop, her voice dripping with contempt. "The nerve of that son of a bitch. Fragile emotional state. He's trying to discredit you before you can even speak." Clara, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and nursing a cup of tea, felt a cold fury replace her fear. "That's what he does," she said, her voice hollow. "He twists everything. He makes you believe you're the one who's crazy." "Not this time," Jessica said, her prosecutor's mind already whirring, connecting dots. "This time he did it in front of 1,000 witnesses. This time he left a digital trail that can't be erased. He thinks he's holed up in a fortress, but all he's done is trap himself. And you're not a fugitive, Clara. You're a survivor. And we're going to make sure he pays for what he did." Jessica's apartment wasn't a gilded cage. It was a sanctuary. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara felt safe. The media could rage, Ethan could spin his lies, and the world could watch. She was out of his reach. The power dynamic had shifted. He was the one who was trapped a prisoner in his own ivory tower, while she, the fugitive, was finally terrifyingly free. For 3 days, the world was obsessed with the public drama of the Hayeses. Ethan remained silent in his penthouse, a pariah in self-imposed exile. Clara stayed with Jessica, shielded from the storm, focusing on her health and the baby. The public narrative, despite Ethan's attempts to poison it, was firmly on her side. Domestic violence charities reported a surge in donations in her name. The story seemed simple. A powerful man's private monstrosity was publicly exposed. But Jessica Riley didn't believe in simple stories. As a prosecutor, she knew that a crime like this was often just the tip of the iceberg, the visible peak of a much larger, darker mass of secrets. "He's not just an abuser, Clara," Jessica said on the third evening, pacing her small living room, a legal pad in her hand. "Men like Ethan narcissists. With this level of control, their corruption is never confined to one area of their lives. It bleeds into everything. His business, his finances, everything." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. "I mean, why was he so terrified of you making a scene? It's more than just public embarrassment, losing his temper like that. It was the act of a man with everything to lose, someone terrified of a secret getting out." Jessica stopped pacing and looked at Clara. "Think, has he been acting strange about business lately? Secretive about finances? Anything out of the ordinary?" Clara thought back over the past year. The endless meetings, The sudden, unexplained business trips to the Cayman Islands. The way he would lock his office at home, something he'd never done before. And then a memory surfaced, small but sharp. About 2 months ago, she walked into his home office to ask him a question. He had slammed his laptop shut so fast it almost broke the screen. But not before she saw a name on a spreadsheet, Project Nightingale. There was something, Clara said slowly. A project he was working on. He was incredibly secretive about it. He called it Project Nightingale. Jessica's eyes lit up. That's a start. Using her legal research databases and a few discreet calls to contacts in the Financial Crimes Unit, Jessica started digging. What she began to uncover was a web of deceit so intricate it took her breath away. Aura Innovations, the company built on the pillar of transparency, was a house of cards. Ethan had been using a series of shell corporations, all registered in offshore tax havens, to embezzle millions from his own company. He was siphoning funds from investor capital, cooking the books to inflate profits, and creating a massive personal slush fund. Project Nightingale wasn't a new security protocol. It was the code name for his exit strategy. He was planning to cash-out-sell the company based on its fraudulent valuation and disappear with hundreds of millions of dollars, leaving his investors and employees with nothing. But that wasn't the biggest twist. The true shock came when Jessica investigated the shell corporations. The primary signatory on the most active account, the one where the majority of the money was being funneled, wasn't Ethan Hayes. It was Sophia Russo. The affair wasn't just an affair. It was a business partnership. Sophia wasn't just a mistress. She was his co-conspirator in a massive fraud. Her promotion to head of global strategy had given her the access she needed to help facilitate the transfers. Oh my God. Clara breathed, staring at the documents Jessica had printed out. Her betrayal felt like it had doubled in size. This wasn't a simple case of infidelity. This was a calculated criminal conspiracy that she had been living inside of. It gets worse, Jessica said, her face grim. She pointed to a different document, a copy of the will for Ethan's late father, the original investor in Aura. There's a clause in his father's trust. Ethan only gains full, unrestricted control of his majority, shares the ones he needs to authorize the sale of the company, upon one of 2 conditions: his 40th birthday, or the birth of his first legitimate heir. Clara's blood ran cold. Ethan's 40th birthday was still 2 years away. The baby, she whispered. He didn't want a family. He needed an heir. He needed a key. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. His sudden insistence on having a child after years of putting it off. His fury at the gala wasn't just about the affair being exposed. He was terrified that Clara, in her anger, would leave him. A divorce before the baby was born would nullify the clause. She would take his key with her, derailing his entire multi-million-dollar escape plan. His violence wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to maintain control over his most valuable asset, his unborn child and the woman carrying him. The slap wasn't just an act of abuse. It was an act of financial desperation. He wasn't just hitting me, Clara said, a horrifying clarity washing over her. He was protecting his money. Exactly, Jessica confirmed. You weren't just an inconvenient wife finding out about an affair. You were a walking, talking threat to his entire criminal enterprise. He had to shut you up at any cost. The story had changed completely. This was no longer just a case of domestic violence. It was now a case of massive corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Clara wasn't just a victim of her husband's temper. She was the unwitting linchpin in a scheme to defraud investors of millions of dollars. And now she held the power to bring it all crashing down. The revelation of Ethan's true motives changed everything for Clara. The pain of personal betrayal morphed into a cold, hard resolve. Her grief was eclipsed by a righteous fury, not just for herself, but for the thousands of employees and investors Ethan was planning to ruin. She was no longer just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for justice. "What do we do?" Clara asked Jessica, her voice steady for the first time in days. "We can't just go to the police. It's his word and Sophia's against mine. They'll bury us in legal fees and destroy my reputation." "You're right," Jessica agreed. "A direct assault is risky. They're prepared for that. We need to build an army. We need to find other people he's wounded." Their first call was to Eleanor Vance. As a senior board member, she had been operating on the assumption that Ethan's crime was personal. When Jessica and Clara laid out the evidence of financial fraud over a secure video call, Eleanor's expression hardened from disappointment into pure steel. "I knew his numbers seemed too good to be true," she said, her voice a low growl. "That arrogant boy. He's been defrauding his own board. He's not just a disgrace. He's a common thief." Eleanor, who had initially seen this as a PR crisis, now saw it as an existential threat to the company she had helped build. She had the power, the connections, and now the motivation to act. "I will handle the board," she declared. "You get me irrefutable proof, and I will ensure there is no golden parachute. There will only be a jail cell." Their next target was more personal. Jessica's research into Project Nightingale had uncovered large unexplained payments to a smaller, now defunct tech company called Innovate Dynamics. Its founder was a man named Marcus Thorne. A quick search revealed that Thorne had once been Ethan's partner. They co-founded Aura Innovations in a garage, but Thorne had been mysteriously bought out for a pittance just before the company went public, vanishing from the tech scene. They found him running a quiet coffee shop in a sleepy coastal town 3 hours from the city. He was a man haunted by the past, with weary eyes and a deep-seated bitterness. At first he refused to talk. "I signed an NDA," he said, flatly wiping down the counter. "Hayes will ruin me." "He's already ruined," Clara said, stepping forward. "You saw the video, Mr. Thorne. I'm his wife." Seeing her pregnant and resolute seemed to break through his wall of fear. He sighed, a sound of years of pent-up frustration. He called it creative accounting back then. Thorne began his story, tumbling out. "He pushed me out with fabricated evidence of incompetence and threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry. He stole my algorithms, the very foundation of Aura, and left me with nothing." Jessica recorded his entire statement. Marcus Thorne was their smoking gun, the origin story of Ethan's corruption. Their alliance was growing. They now had a powerful board member from the inside and a wronged co-founder from the outside. But they needed to fracture Ethan's own team. They needed to get to Sophia. This was Clara's task. She knew Sophia wasn't motivated by love, but by ambition and greed. If she knew the ship was sinking, she would be the first one to jump into a lifeboat. Clara, using a burner phone, sent a single anonymous text to Sophia Russo. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple data file. It contained the flight details for a one-way ticket to Zurich under Ethan's name, departing in 2 weeks, and a second ticket for the same flight under a false name, Isabella Rossi. There was no ticket for Sophia. The message was clear. Ethan was planning to run, and he was planning to leave her behind to take the fall. He was creating a new identity for himself, but not for her. For 2 days there was silence. Then a package arrived at Jessica's apartment via a bonded courier. It contained a single encrypted flash drive and no note. Jessica plugged it into a secure laptop. On it was everything. Copies of the offshore bank statements, emails between Sophia and Ethan detailing the fraudulent transfers, a complete ledger for Project Nightingale. Sophia had kept her own meticulous records and insurance policy. In turning over the drive, she was betting on immunity in exchange for her testimony. She had chosen self-preservation over loyalty to Ethan. The alliance was complete. Clara looked at the mountain of evidence they had assembled in less than a week. They had insiders, outsiders, and a co-conspirator who had turned state's evidence. It was an airtight case, built not just on legal strategy, but on the shared pain of everyone Ethan Hayes had ever betrayed. He built an empire by wounding people, Clara said quietly, looking at Jessica, and the evidence spread across her dining table. And now the wounded are coming to tear it down. The final act didn't play out in a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was colder, faster, and far more brutal, a corporate execution carried out with digital precision. The plan was two-pronged. While Jessica compiled the evidence into a devastating package for the district attorney's office, Eleanor Vance called a second emergency board meeting. The official reason was to vote on Ethan's formal termination. Ethan, through his lawyer, demanded to be present via video conference, confident he could bully his way into a generous severance package. It was his final fatal miscalculation. He appeared on the large screen in the boardroom, looking haggard but defiant, sitting in his sterile white home office. "This has been a regrettable week," he began, his tone arrogant. "However, my personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company. This board's knee-jerk reaction has already cost shareholders billions." Eleanor let him finish. Then, with ice in her veins, she said, "Mr. Hayes, this meeting is not about the events at the Gala. It is about a different matter. A matter we are calling Project Nightingale." The blood drained from Ethan's face on the screen. He was momentarily speechless. Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the other board members. "We have received irrefutable evidence of a systematic multi-year fraud perpetrated by you and Ms. Sophia Russo designed to embezzle millions from this company in preparation for a fraudulent sale. We have bank statements, emails, and a full confession from your former partner, Marcus Thorne, whose intellectual property you stole to build this company." As she spoke, a file was emailed to every board member. They opened it to find the entire cache of documents from Sophia's flash drive. The silence in the room was absolute as they scrolled through the proof of his staggering betrayal. Ethan's composure finally shattered. "Lies!" he shrieked, his image pixelating as he lunged toward his camera. "This is a conspiracy. My wife, my unstable wife, is behind this. She's turning you all against me." "Your wife, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said coolly, "is about to become the wealthiest whistleblower in this city's history. The board has already voted. You are terminated for cause. Your shares are frozen. Your contracts are null and void. Security is on their way to your residence to collect all company property. Do not resist them." Simultaneously, Jessica was sitting in the DA's office, walking the chief of the Economic Crimes Bureau through the same evidence. The DA, who had been under immense public pressure to act on the assault charge, now saw a much bigger career-making case unfold before him. Warrants were signed within the hour. Ethan's world ended not with a bang, but with a knock on the door. He was still reeling from the board meeting when 2 detectives from the NYPD's white-collar crime unit, accompanied by federal agents, presented him with a warrant for his arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The final humiliation was exquisitely public. The man who was once the king of the city was led out of his luxury penthouse in handcuffs. The paparazzi who had been camped outside for a week hoping for a shot of Clara were there to capture it all. The images of the disgraced billionaire, his face a mask of impotent rage, were even more viral than the video of the slap. His fortress had become his prison. Sophia Russo was arrested an hour later at her lawyer's office, having already negotiated a plea deal. Months later, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas, a name with no connection to the Hayes family dynasty. The divorce was swift. Ethan, facing decades in prison, signed away everything in exchange for her agreement not to pursue further civil charges. A court-appointed receiver took over Aura Innovations, restructuring it and saving it from bankruptcy. A portion of Ethan's frozen assets, as part of a settlement, was placed in a trust for Nicholas. Clara moved out of the city. She bought a quiet house with a garden, not far from Marcus Thorne's coffee shop. She had testified before the grand jury, her voice clear and strong, and then retreated from the public eye. She had found her freedom not in the downfall of her husband, but in the reclaiming of her own voice. Her alliance of the wounded had won. Eleanor had saved her company. Marcus had received a massive settlement for his stolen work and was finally recognized as a co-founder of Aura. Jessica had become a star at the DA's office, and Clara, she had her son. She had her peace. The gilded cage was just a distant memory, a bad dream from another lifetime. She had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. 2 years passed. The digital storm that had consumed the lives of Ethan and Clara Hayes faded into the internet's vast, ever-churning memory, becoming another cautionary tale of hubris and downfall. In a small coastal town where the scent of salt and roses hung in the air, Clara had built a life so profoundly different from her past that it felt like a story she had once read about someone else. Her world was no longer measured in carats or stock points, but in the small, sun-drenched moments that made up her days. It was the weight of her son Nicholas, now a boisterous toddler with her eyes and a fiercely independent spirit, asleep on her chest. It was the satisfaction of pulling weeds from her thriving vegetable garden, her hands stained with the rich, dark earth. It was the easy laughter shared with her friend Marcus Thorne over coffee at his now flourishing cafe, The Daily Grind, which had become the heart of the town. She had healed, but healing, she learned, was not a destination. It was a practice. There were still nights when a sudden noise would make her flinch, or a headline about corporate greed would bring a cold knot to her stomach. But the fear no longer owned her. She had a therapist she spoke with bi-weekly, who helped her untangle the complex web of trauma Ethan had woven. She was not the fragile, broken woman who had fled the Gala. She was a mosaic pieced back together with stronger glue. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Nicholas napped, Clara sat on her porch swing, scrolling through the news on a tablet, a simple device a world away from the bleeding-edge tech that had once defined her life. She rarely looked for news about her past, but today an article caught her eye. It was a 2-year retrospective on the fall of Ethan Hayes. The article concisely summarized the fallout. Ethan, refusing any plea deal, had been convicted on all counts. His lack of remorse and continued insistence that he was the victim of a vast conspiracy, led by his unstable wife, had done him no favors with the judge. He was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. The piece included a recent grainy prison photo. His charismatic smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed bitterness. He was a king, dethroned, stripped of everything but his own corrosive rage. Sophia Russo, true to her nature, had fared better. Her extensive cooperation had earned her a plea deal, resulting in a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility. She had been released 6 months ago. The article noted she was now living in obscurity under a different name, her brilliant career and reputation irrevocably destroyed. She had climbed high and fallen hard, a modern Icarus. There was also a mention of Aura Innovations. Under the steely ethical guidance of Eleanor Vance, the company had undergone a painful but necessary restructuring. Rebranded as Veritas Data, it was slowly rebuilding its reputation on a foundation of radical transparency, its very existence a testament to the failure of its founder. Clara closed the article feeling not a sense of victory or glee, but a profound, quiet peace. Their stories were over. Hers was still being written. As if summoned by her thoughts, the mail carrier pulled up. In the small bundle of letters was a familiar-looking envelope, a crisp, business-like thing that stood out from the local circulars and bills. The return address made her breath catch. USP Canaan, a federal penitentiary. It was from him. Her first instinct was a jolt of pure primal fear. Her hands trembled as she held the letter. For a fleeting moment she was back in the gilded cage. Her every move scrutinized, her every thought anticipated and controlled. She could feel his voice in her head, the smooth, venomous whisper he used before he raged. Then she looked through the screen door and saw the gentle rise and fall of her son's chest as he slept in his crib. She looked at her garden, at the sturdy tomato vines she had cultivated from seedlings. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her own life, a life she had built with her own 2 hands. He had no power here. This was her soil, her home, her peace. He was just a ghost, a bad memory trapped behind bars and barbed wire 1,000 miles away. She walked into her kitchen without opening the letter. She turned on the gas stove, the blue flame clicking to life. She held the envelope over the burner. The corner caught, turning black, before blossoming into a bright orange flame. She watched as his name, his words, his final attempt to breach the walls of her new world turned to ash. She felt nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle beating of her own steady heart. Later that evening, Jessica came to visit her sleek city car, a stark contrast to the dusty pickup trucks that lined the street. Her career had skyrocketed. She was now the head of her unit at the DA's office. But she always made time for Clara and her godson. They sat on the porch drinking wine as the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of purple and gold. Nicholas, awake and full of energy, chased fireflies on the lawn. "You seem good, Clara," Jessica said, her sharp eyes soft. "Really good." "I am," Clara replied, and she knew it was the truest thing she had ever said. "I'm thinking of starting a non-profit, a small one, helping women who are trying to leave abusive situations navigate the legal system, using some of Nicholas's trust fund for the seed money." Jessica smiled a wide, genuine smile. "That's brilliant. You'd be amazing at it." Clara watched her son, who had just managed to catch a blinking light in his chubby hands, his face a perfect picture of wonder. The empire of Ethan Hayes, built on lies and theft, had produced nothing but ruin. But from its ashes, she had cultivated this, a life, a future, a quiet, unshakable joy. The reckoning was long over. Now it was time for the bloom. Clara's story is a powerful and stark reminder that the most pristine surfaces can hide the deepest rot. It shows us that true strength isn't about enduring abuse in silence. It's about finding the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. In a world saturated by social media, a camera phone became an unlikely weapon for justice, proving that secrets can't survive in the glare of 1,000 tiny lights. But more than that, it's a story about alliances, about how the collective strength of those who have been wronged can become an unstoppable force for change. Ethan's empire crumbled not just because of one video, but because of the web of lies he spun over years, which finally ensnared him. If you were moved by Clara's journey from a victim to a survivor, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of courage and resilience. And for more true-life dramas and incredible stories, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of the twist involving Project Nightingale? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.